Okay. Well, I'm so excited to talk about this again today. I have been immersed in Ross Greene's work, the collaborative problem solving model that I discovered first as a parent a year or two ago. I was looking for something to implement at home. And by coincidence, I was sharing it with Betsy, and she said, "We're working on that here at Greenspring too." And I know that many of you did an introductory training with Betsy last year. And then those of you who hadn't did so with me a month or two ago. We did a review of those basics. So although we will be quickly going over what was part of our introduction that you either did with Betsy or with me earlier this year, we're going to move really fast through that because we're doing a deeper dive and we're really going to practice the technique. I've discovered it's trickier than it seems. I think it's genius, but it takes some practice sort of to get the phrasing right and the technique right. And so we're going to practice together. Don't worry, we're not doing any role playing. No one has to pretend to be a child or a teacher, but we are going to brainstorm together at times in small groups and just be each other's coaches and get a little bit more experience under our belts. So hopefully those of you who haven't tried this yet in real life will be inspired to give it a try. So today we are talking about the collaborative problem solving model, although I wanted to mention that the name of this is actually just changed recently. Same initials, but it's changed to the not collaborative problem solving. Oh, why can't I see where I wrote it down? It is, I'm totally blanking on it, so I'll have to come back to you. I'm still calling it collaborative problem solving just because that's what I'm used to. And the three parts of this process, as far as what we're doing today, are sort of briefly reviewing how we change our mindset to look at challenging behavior. We're going to take a look at the newly revised ALSUP. If those of you have used it in past years, it was revised in 2020. So we'll look at that briefly and look at the changes, but we'll spend most of our time talking about Plan B, which is really the meat of collaborative problem solving, how we identify the difficulty that the student is having, how we identify our own concern as the adult, and then how we brainstorm together to find solutions. So let's take just a minute. It was kind of last minute and I emailed people yesterday. There is a little worksheet I created for today. If you were able to print that out, fantastic. There are blanks where you can sort of write in the activities that we're doing together. If you didn't have a chance to print that out, you can just jot this down on a piece of paper. But I'd like everyone to write down 2 challenging behaviors that you've observed in your classroom, either in your handout or on paper. If you're not in a classroom, something you remember, something you've seen a child do, or you can just make something up. Most of us should be able to kind of come up with something. So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes.
Margaret, is this going to be like in general classroom, whole classroom behavior, or is it like particular child who has a problem?
I would imagine, great question. I would imagine for this an individual child, if you would. Now we can do this technique with a whole class too, but I think it'll be easier for practice today to think about an individual.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. So now keep these challenges in mind as we walk through this process. You may want to picture this particular child or one of these challenging behaviors and think about it as we go through each step. So first, I wanted to start quickly by looking at common beliefs about why a child is exhibiting challenging behavior. These are the common cliches that the child is attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. Some others are about the parents, that parents are passive, permissive, inconsistent. But thanks to an enormous amount of research that's been conducted over the past 50 years, we've learned a lot more about behaviorally challenging children. And we've learned that behavior modification strategies that a lot of us use are actually counterproductive and ineffective. So the first thing Dr. Greene asked us to do is to sort of look at this through a new lens so that we have a different understanding, a more compassionate and accurate understanding of why challenging behavior happens and what we can do about it. So here's the crux of it. You've heard this before. Kids do well if they can. Dr. Greene challenges us to accept this radical new perspective. They don't do well only if they want to. They do well if they can. Now, just a note here, you'll hear Dr. Greene refer to children as kids all throughout his books and his videos. At Greenspring, we say children or students instead of kids, and I've changed that as we move forward. So just something to keep in mind. So there are a couple key fundamentals I'm just going to go through quickly. We talked about these last time. Our explanation of a child's behavior guides our intervention. So first we have to accept that premise that children do well if they can. Because if we think the child isn't doing well because he doesn't want to, then our job is to make the child want to. And we have the methods to do this. We reward the behaviors we like and punish the behaviors we don't, or give the child incentive to do well based on the belief that he didn't have the incentive in the first place. We also might think a child isn't doing well because he's learned that that behavior is a way to get something he wants or avoid something he doesn't like, or again, because of that poor parenting. And again, that will guide our intervention to be based on rewarding the behavior we like and punishing the behavior we don't like. So if we accept that if a child could do well, he would do well. If a child has the skills to exhibit adaptive behavior, he or she wouldn't be exhibiting challenging behavior. It's because doing well is preferable to not doing well. Children do well if they can, and they want to do well. So that's our starting place. So again, if we accept that the behavior is coming from an obstacle that's preventing her from doing well, our role changes. Now it's our job to figure out what's standing in the child's way of being successful. This is in perfect alignment with our Montessori training. When one of our students is struggling, we ask ourselves, what is it that this child needs? And what can I do to meet the need? Or if there's a dysfunctional dynamic in the classroom, we ask, how can we change the environment to enable the children to be more successful? So to help, we must first understand the obstacle that's in the way of the child being successful. And it's important to remember throughout this process that the challenging behavior itself is not the problem. Instead, we're going to try to answer the more important question, what does this child need? So to do that, we have to focus not on the behavior and how to make it stop, but what the child's communicating through the behavior. And one nice way to visualize this is by thinking about a stream, and the challenging behavior that we're seeing, it's downstream. But what's causing the problem is upstream. So if we only manage the behavior, the child still has unsolved problems upstream that will continue to trigger the behaviors downstream. If we identify the problems and solve them, then we're also resolving the challenging behaviors. So Ross Greene explains that as a definition, challenging behavior occurs when the demands and expectations put upon a child exceed their capacity to respond adaptively. And if they're responding maladaptively, they must not be able to meet those demands and expectations. That's a really different framework than they're limit testing, they're pushing me, they're being difficult, they're being manipulative. It's a totally different framework. And Dr. Greene sort of has found over his 20 years of work that the most common demands and expectations that children have trouble meeting kind of fall into three categories of what he calls umbrella skills: flexibility or adaptability, frustration tolerance, and problem solving. And they have difficulty applying these skills when they're the most needed. And this is what helps me so much. He actually views challenging behavior as a developmental delay, just like any other learning difference. So if a child has a reading delay, we support them with specialized help in reading. If a child has a physical delay, they have OT or PT. And if a child has a delay that's causing them to exhibit challenging behavior, we support them with that and they can get better. If we keep thinking of them as manipulative and attention seeking and limit testing, he finds that they often get worse. So that's why we're spending so much time on changing the lens that we're looking at challenging behavior through. So the intervention then is, well, it's simple, it's not easy though, is to figure out what skills are lacking and teach those skills, or figure out what unsolved problems are precipitating the challenging episodes and work on solving them. The beauty of the approach is that in the process of kind of moving problems from the unsolved category to the solved category, we are simultaneously teaching the child many of the skills that she's lacking that set the stage for that challenging behavior in the first place. Now this is, so Karen, this is the first step of what you do when you've identified a child with a challenging behavior that you want to work on. There's a tool called the ALSUP, which stands for Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. Many of you have seen this before. As I mentioned, though, it was updated just recently in 2020, and so you may notice it looks a little different. There used to be 23 lagging skills. It's been shortened to 18. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but just representative. And then at the bottom is where you write in the unsolved problems. And that's something a little different because it used to be like the lagging skills on the left, and then each of those you sort of translated into an unsolved problem. Now we're differentiating those two things. But it's not that important. What is important is that you realize this is not a rating scale or a checklist. It's meant as a discussion guide. So this is going to be the guide that helps us identify what we want to work on, what our top priorities are. And we are only focusing on things we can do something about. So we're not going to list as an unsolved problem that a child was born premature or has a history of trauma or is on the autism spectrum or something like that. We unfortunately can't do anything about those things. So we're going to just focus on challenging behaviors and things that we think we have a shot at assisting with. So during the ALSUP meeting, ideally this would be with parents and educators together and other stakeholders. So if there's a therapist involved or an OT or a tutor, anyone who works on that child's team would be great to have at this meeting. And each person gets a blank copy of the ALSUP. So as we go through in the first section, let's see, I have a blow up of the lagging skills checklist. So you go through each one and check off all the lagging skills that you think apply. For example, difficulty maintaining focus, sensory motor issues, whatever they are. And it does not need to be unanimous. If one person in the group sees it, it gets checked. And
so
honestly,
Margaret,
yeah.
So everybody shares this with each other, like the parents and the guide and whoever?
Well, you would be doing this sort of together in a group meeting, ideally. Now, if you could not get the parents participation or buy-in, you could still do this as an educational team, just because these are things you want to work on with or without the parents' participation. But of course, the more stakeholders you have involved, the more successful it's going to be. But the important thing is that not everyone has to agree. Like, we don't stop and argue over, oh, I don't see that. Oh, I do. I mean, if someone has a concern, they just check it. So that this should really be the easy and fastest part of the process, like 3 to 5 seconds on each thing. So this whole section is done in 2 or 3 minutes is the idea. The unsolved problems part is going to take a little bit longer. And again, this is not how the old ALSUP used to work. In the old one, the lagging skills were used as prompts to write the unsolved problems. Now there are slightly different prompts that the group can, someone in the group can read out loud to kind of guide the discussion. For example, in the school setting, are there specific tasks, expectations that the student is having difficulty completing or getting started on? Or, you know, for example. And these take a little bit longer. It should take about a minute for the group to write each unsolved problem. So if a child has 30 problems, it's going to take about 32 minutes, you know, to fill out this whole form. And that sounds like a long time, but we have to think long run, because thinking about how much time it takes to deal with outbursts that the child has on a regular basis, it's most assuredly more than, you know, 30 minutes of our time in the long run. So this is an investment. So for example, someone who's facilitating the conversation might read that question. Are there specific tasks, expectations the student's having difficulty getting started on? So let's say someone in the group, maybe the classroom teacher, says, yes, she keeps getting upset and running out of the room. So hopefully the most experienced person on this team stops right there and reminds the group, oh, wait a second, this is the behavior. You're describing the behavior. So we want to think about, we want to drill down even further. When is that happening? So the guide might say, oh, during circle time, but we still don't really have enough information. So what is happening during circle time when she runs out of the room? And maybe the guide says, well, it's usually when we're singing. So then our facilitator might say, are you telling me that Teresa's having difficulty with singing during circle time? And if the person agrees yes, then we write that in as an unsolved problem. So we're trying to be as specific as possible, and we're going to practice this. So because this is probably the trickiest part of the whole process, is figuring out how to phrase the unsolved problem. We are so used to identifying challenging behavior that it's really easy to go there first. And so what I'm hoping is that when we all become really comfortable with this, we can serve as each other's coaches and facilitators in reframing.
Margaret,
So,
I'm sorry. I have a question. So
I'll go back.
the form from beginning to end is working on one of the behaviors that has been detected. It's not like a general assessment of the child.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, right now you're creating a laundry list. So this is everything you can think of that you're concerned about, broken out into as many specific subparts as possible. And again, I'm going to go into that in a second, and we're actually going to practice it. But then after that, we are going to pick just 1 or 2 or at a max 3 things to work on, because we can't do all of this at once. So we're going to triage, prioritize, and, you know, pick the first thing that we want to do.
Margaret, how long do we wait before we fill out this ALSUP, form? Like, it cannot be beginning of the year, but, like around like 3 months into school, or when do we start identifying? I mean, some children, it's like right away. It's it just comes very hard and it just stays there. But when do we typically start a form, like, like make it official and talk about this? Like, we have to problem solve. When would be a good time?
I think as soon as you're having an issue with a child, when you identify any kind of issue with a child, because this doesn't have to just be for children who are, like, actually one of the problems I wrote down is that Georgie's not getting up and emptying the dishwasher in the morning, which is her role, right? So it's not a child that necessarily has a concern form. This can be true about any unsolved problem that you're seeing with the child. They come in the morning and they start, it's a child who eventually settles in, but when they come in, they tend to run over and hug somebody too hard. It's any, right, Margaret? It's really like,
That's a really good point, is you do not have to reserve this for the student that's having such a trouble that we're filling, like you said, filling out the concern form, calling the parents in. So you might not even need to fill out an ALSUP. If you have one child with one behavior that you'd like to help coach them on, you'll just get straight to plan B, which is coming up, and walk through your steps. And it can just be part of sort of your classroom practice. This ALSUP form is when a child has so much going on, you probably have either already filled out the concern form or you're getting ready to, and you're observing, and you're working through the steps.
Okay. No, I'm just thinking because it's a child, a new child, especially a 3-year-old, when he's just stepped into children's house, they don't know what is expected, what is okay. So you guide them and you tell them, and then they know in a month's time that, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. And then if it's not changing, then you start talking about it, like, but it does take them some time to learn this behavior. So how much time is enough time?
I think you have to follow your gut, because if we're defining challenging behavior as the child expectations that are exceeding the child's capacity to meet them, we obviously have to give the child some time to learn what the expectations are and settle into a routine. And it would just become that point at which you're feeling like it's been enough time, and you really are surprised that hasn't happened, and maybe something else is going on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Those are great questions, and that really helps drive the conversation.
It does. All right, so here's the tricky part about phrasing unsolved problems. So as I mentioned before, we want to avoid describing the behavior. Instead, we start with the word difficulty or difficulty with. And the reason is we want everyone in the meeting, or even just we're retraining our own brain to remember that the behavior is not the unsolved problem. It's the expectation that the child is having difficulty meeting that's causing the behavior. So if we keep the challenging behavior in the wording here, and then later we pluck something off this list and drop it straight into our conversation with the child, we're going to be throwing that behavior in their face, and the child is going to get defensive and far less likely to participate in the process. And this whole model is based on collaborative problem solving, and we need the child to participate. So that's why instead of saying the child wanders around the room, we have to work really hard to think about how we can say that. What's the skill? The child has difficulty choosing work independently, or whatever it is. That's just an example. We also want to avoid including any adult theories about why this is happening or why this is a challenge. So we might have a really good hunch about why it's happening, but sometimes we're wrong. And the other problem about assuming is that then we often forget to ask the child about it. So this word, and again, this wording translates directly into the words we're going to use when we talk to the child. So if we say the child is having difficulty completing the work cycle because of attention challenges, we have just sort of undone the question that we're trying to pursue, which is what expectation is precipitating this behavior. We're just assuming we know. And later when we ask the child, like, what's going on with you? They won't even know what we're asking because we think we already know the answer. So if you see the word because in your unsolved problem, put a period. Like, just don't go there right now. There's time later for the why. So difficulty completing the work cycle, period. Another trap to fall into is making the problems too general. And then the child has to think about all the different ways, all the different aspects of that. So if we phrase something like has difficulty getting along with other children, first of all, we don't really know what we mean yet. We're not sure exactly what we're talking about. When we try to talk to the child about it, we've increased our likelihood of her answering, I don't know. So we need to be as specific as possible. And besides, there are probably 20 or 30 or infinite ways a child could have difficulty getting along with other children. So the child might have difficulty taking turns in a conversation. The child might have difficulty waiting patiently, might have difficulty using words to express frustration, might have difficulty joining in a game at recess. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And it seems tedious to split these out, but there could be different things going on. And we just, again, this is the laundry list. Then we're going to pick our top priorities out of it. If we find out later that 3 or 4 of these challenges are sort of all connected, we can clump them together later. But if we clump them together now, we might never really find out what's going on. So that's why Dr. Greene says, split early, clump later. Like, really make this as long a list as you can. And the last piece of advice is to be as specific as possible. So if we write an unsolved problem like difficulty writing, again, I mean, there's so many components of writing. Is this formulating an idea? Is this actually getting it on the paper? Is it fine motor skill? You know, there's so many aspects. So there are 2 tricks. We can rely on asking W questions. Who, what, where, when, why, like, with whom is this difficult, or what part of writing is difficult, or when is this difficult, where, you know, we can try honing in that way. Or we can also ask ourselves, what specific expectation is this child having difficulty meeting? So the child might have 10 different challenges related to writing, but one of them that we might put on the ALSUP is difficulty with the pincer grip or undeveloped pincer grip, something like that. So here's where we're going to practice. We're going to practice with this statement. Someone has brought this concern to the table. The child is not motivated. And I hope a little red flag just went up for you that this problem is not properly phrased, because there's judgment and also an adult theory embedded in the way the statement is phrased. So when we get into our breakout groups, we're going to work to rephrase this as an unsolved problem. And if you do have the handout printed out, these guidelines are on the handout about not describing behavior, leaving out adult theories, splitting, and being specific. And I'm also going to ask you to unclump this as much as possible. So you might be able to think of 3 or 5 or 10 different unsolved problems that could be related to child is not motivated. And each of those should be phrased as difficulty with blah, blah, blah. And this is hard. That's why we're not going to role play and act it out. And, you know, let's just brainstorm in our small groups, and just have some, you know, jot things down, and let's see how many different unsolved problems we can identify and how and help each other with the phrasing. Please coach each other because this is hard. Any questions about what we're going to do? We're going to have 10 minutes this time.
Good.
Would anyone like to share some examples of how their group broke out child is not motivated into some more specific pieces? I'd just love to see sort of a sampling of how many different kinds of things we were able to figure out.
Margaret, I don't know. I'm assuming we did this correctly, but well, first off, so when we were looking at our little paper here, it said be specific as possible, and it did say why up there. So we questioned that a little bit because that seemed like the because that we shouldn't be saying. But so we tried to sort of break it down in, so difficulty with choosing math work or what type of work it was, if it was math or language or trying to be specific that way, or difficulty with finishing work in math, or, you know, however, whatever the area was. And if it's all of it, then we would have to be more general. But if we can pinpoint that it maybe was in one specific area, we said difficulty with confidence to try new things in math. I know I keep saying math, but you know what I mean.
For example.
Or difficulty with asking questions if they're unsure of something. And then we were trying to look at where. So we did try to say, difficulty with when collaborating with friends or when working independently, or, trying to kind of pinpoint when it's happening. So
I love that your team pushed back on the why, because we can ask the child why they think something might be happening, but you're right, a why at this point for us would get into the adult theory mode. So who, what, where, when, not why. I agree with you. Great. I would also suggest that even if there are multiple academic areas that are challenges, instead of grouping them, those just get all listed each as their own separate unsolved problem, because they might have, you're going to tackle them differently. But that was great. Thank you. Anyone else, this group, come up with some more options?
Yeah, we had a child who tended to avoid handwriting. So maybe, and it happened all the time. And maybe this child had a difficulty with finding time in his daily schedule to practice handwriting. And then maybe we push it even further, maybe is lacking the vocabulary to, maybe is having difficulty with the precise vocabulary to describe shapes of the letters.
And those are really good theories about why the child is avoiding handwriting. And if I may, I would suggest that we discuss the theories, but then push them to the side. And the unsolved problem you write right now is difficulty either with handwriting or difficulty choosing handwriting, period. Because then we're going to keep diving deeper to see if we can validate any of those.
And really, those are two different things, right? So you'd want to really look at, are they really struggling with the handwriting when they're doing it? Or are they, can we say avoiding? Avoiding is a judgment word, right?
Right. We took that word away.
Yeah.
Difficulty choosing.
Difficulty choosing. Right.
Choosing handwriting.
That's great. And that's such a great specific example.
Right.
It's not just difficulty choosing work. It's difficulty you asked which type of work. Any other examples?
It's really helpful to have you all share like that. Thank you very much. That helps everybody, forward the conversation for everyone.
Does
difficulty staying on task. Difficulty completing a work.
Yes, difficulty completing a work.
Or completing the work cycle. Then you could even break it down though more. Is it a difficulty completing all work?
Mm.
Or is it a difficulty with, math again, or, right? Or is it a difficulty putting the work back on the shelf?
And we could also ask if a child is having difficulty completing the work, not only which work, but when is that most often an issue? Is it towards the end of the work cycle? Is it in the afternoon work cycle? Is it on Friday? Is it on Monday? And we could also ask with whom are they having difficulty completing the work? Is it when the child is working alone or with a partner or with a group? Where are they having difficulty completing the work? Is it when they're in this area or, the outdoor environment, the indoor environment, at an individual table, on the rug? I mean, all of those specifics can help us hone in on what the difficulty is. And that's where we need to coach each other, because in our group, each person thought of 5 things that the other person hadn't thought of. So this is a great exercise to do, at least bouncing ideas off of one other person. And you can see it takes a little practice to get used to it, but then hopefully this becomes more automatic as we get used to thinking that way.
Margaret, I have a question. It's Danisha. I was finding it challenging to how to apply it to toddlers. I can see how I can break it down as far as to identify the difficulty, but it's not as if I can have a conversation with a 2-year-old. Do you know what I mean? So how,
I think the practical application, the brainstorming with the child phase, is not always going to be possible with the pre-verbal children. I know Dr. Greene has done some work with visual cues. So little illustrations that show hungry, thirsty, mad, sad, and has even experimented with this by showing the cues. But not all of this is going to be directly relevant. I think what is the most relevant to your age group is this step, which is reframing the child, focusing not as much on the behavior, but trying to figure out what the behavior is communicating. And you might have to do more adult theorizing with toddlers, because they're just not able to help you with it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
True. And yeah, I'm grateful for the toddler perspective, because there may be other pieces that just don't work, or you need to figure out, maybe you can be creative and adapt for your age group. And I'd love to hear more about that if you practice. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So now let's say you've got a list of unsolved problems, either on the ALSUP, or as Sonia pointed out, maybe we just have one child who's struggling with something. It's, not a huge concern, but we want to help them address it. So we've got something in mind that we want to work on. If it is a child with a long list, or even just a few things, we have to prioritize what we're going to work on first. Safety always comes first. So if someone is doing something that hurts themselves or others, is running away, anything that's a safety concern, that's going to be our top priority. Next, we would prioritize frequency. If something is happening a lot, then obviously that's more disruptive and more important to handle sooner rather than later. And also gravity, how serious it is. So a child who's coming in and having trouble remembering to change into slippers, is something we might want to work on. But if there's something definitely more pressing than that, we can probably wait for a little while to address that one. You want to pick no more than 3, although I find it's helpful just to really focus on one at a time. But let's say you've picked 3 things. Dr. Greene does have another tool that sort of goes with the ALSUP, and it's called the problem solving plan. again, I don't think you'd need to fill this out if this is a real casual strategy that you're implementing just to help a child with a skill. But if this is a child with a lot of concerns and the parents are involved and you've had your ALSUP meeting, it could be very helpful to fill this out. The thing on the right is what the piece of paper looks like. I blew up the top of it just so that you could see what it says. And you pick your top 3 unsolved problems that you want to address. This, by the way, all the resources are on Dr. Greene's website. It's called Lives in the Balance. I'm going to be sending up a follow-up email with all the links. But what's amazing is that everything's on there. It's all free. All the form, they're also going to be in our general drive. But all the videos we're watching, all the resources are all on the website, all free. And there's one portal for parents and there's one portal for educators. So it's an amazing website. And on the website, this comes in an editable PDF format so that you can type straight into it. And in some schools, this problem solving plan has replaced what they've been using as a traditional behavior management plan. So as part of this plan, we designate someone to take primary responsibility for the concern. And it really should be the person whose expectation the child is having difficulty meeting. So 99% of the time, that's going to be the adult in the classroom. And again, if this became the standard pre-referral triage instrument in every school, we'd see fewer testing referrals because we're going to at least pick off this low-hanging fruit, the things we can do ourselves. So now we get to the exciting part. This is Plan B and sort of what we do once we figured out what we want to work on. But I'll stop. So first we have to talk about why Dr. Greene calls this Plan B. There are actually plans A, B, and C. Plan A is solving the problem unilaterally. Plan B, which we're focusing on, is solving the problem collaboratively and proactively. And Plan C is setting aside an unsolved problem just for now so that you can triage and focus on more important things. So Plan A, which we're familiar with, is unilateral. For example, I've decided that, this is how we're solving this problem. It utilizes rewards and punishments, and it's familiar and comfortable. Many of us were raised this way. It's also convenient because it works in the short term. So using rewards like stickers, candy, money, even praise, those tend to get a quick payoff. Punishments that a lot of parents use, like timeout, or things that are implemented in a lot of school settings like missing recess or detention, are those traditional punishments we see often. In a lot of school settings, you see behavior management systems like red, yellow, and green, and the child somewhere on the behavior spectrum. So kids who don't have difficulty regulating emotions often do have the skills to handle Plan A well. They may not love it, but they can handle it. The downside is they're not learning anything, but it kind of works. The problem is that Plan A actually triggers challenging behavior in challenging kids. And the paradox is that it's the children least capable of handling Plan A, the ones prone to behavioral challenges, that are the most likely to get it. But having will imposed on you requires skills to handle that. Flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance. And these are often the skills that these children don't have. And when we place those expectations on them, we're increasing the likelihood of seeing that challenging behavior. So I'm skipping Plan B for a second because that's where we're going to spend most of our time. Plan C is about prioritizing. We can't fix everything at once, so we're going to solve the biggest problem first and then come back to the others. This is not caving in, but simply prioritizing. And there are two types of Plan C. There's emergency Plan C, which is dropping something in the moment. And then better is proactive Plan C. You agree or plan to let something go ahead of time, just for now. But an example of that in the home might be teeth brushing. Like, we're going to work on hitting our sister before we worry about compliance with teeth brushing. And in the classroom, we might address interrupting a lesson before we address changing into slippers, kind of thing. So we're just prioritizing. Now, Plan B, why do we go this route instead? Because we believe the child is showing us he needs a tour guide to overcome these unsolved problems. And just like we talked about teaching skills to the child with the reading delay, or providing OT or PT for the child with a physical delay, we teach skills to the child who has difficulty navigating problems and regulating emotions. That's their delay. So just a quick note here. Some people balk at this point because they're concerned that Plan B involves dropping expectations for the child. Don't worry, it doesn't. Expectations are a good thing. In fact, you can't do Plan B unless you have expectations for the child. We do have to make sure they're realistic expectations for the child at this point in her development. And that's something we find out when we start working with the child. So there are two types of Plan B, just like there were two types of Plan C. There's emergency Plan B, which is what you implement in the moment. It's crisis management. And there's proactive Plan B, which is an attempt to prevent the challenging behavior from happening in the first place. We're not really going to talk about emergency Plan B. It's the same process, but our goal is to be proactive so that we're out ahead of it. And often when a child is already in great distress or in crisis mode, they are not able to hear or reason or, process with you. So you're going to have to wait anyway until another time and loop back around to it. So you'll end up in the same boat of trying to work with the child proactively. But here are the 3 steps, and Tamara and I renamed them because we thought Ross Greene, in fact, he even admits it in one of his videos, he wishes he'd named them different things. He called step 1 the empathy step. I'm going to call it defining the child's difficulty. Step 2 is, which he calls define the problem. We think is more accurately defining the adult's concern. So first we get the child's difficulty or concern on the table, then we get the adult's concern on the table, and then step 3, which he calls the invitation, we start brainstorming together ways that we're going to solve this problem. So step 1, defining the child's difficulty, is all about gathering information from the child to understand his concern or perspective about a given problem. So this is the part, Danusha, that you may not be able to implement with toddlers, although I still don't think it would hurt to model this type of self-reflection, because it starts with, I've noticed that, and you drop in one of those unsolved problems that you wrote on the ALSUP that you so carefully phrased without judgment and without an adult theory, and you made it really specific, and you've already done that work, so you just drop it in here. It's totally neutral, and then you add what's up, or if you don't like what's up, your version of, what's going on with that. Our goal is to get the child talking. So with a toddler, if you don't think that's going to happen, I still think it'd be kind of interesting just to say, I've noticed that you have difficulty, da 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 da. Maybe that's as far as you get with a toddler. With an older child, you add what's up, and then our goal is to get the child talking. We're hoping to keep going until we have this aha moment in which we understand the problem from their point of view. So for example, I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to finish your work before putting it away. What's up? Or I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to wait until I'm finished with my lesson when you need help. What's up? So it's as simple but as difficult as all that. And now I'm going to let you listen to Ross Greene give some examples of this.
The empathy step of proactive Plan B begins with a neutral observation. And these days I've been trying to be much more explicit about what words people should use. The words I usually use and encourage other people to use is, I've noticed that. And now what you're doing is you're plucking a problem from your list of unsolved problems and you're dropping it in and then finishing with what's up. Here's what it might sound like. I've noticed you haven't been too enthusiastic about taking your meds lately. What's up? I've noticed it's been really hard for you to get going on your social studies project lately. What's up? I've noticed you haven't been too enthusiastic about sitting next to Billy in circle time lately. What's up? I've noticed you haven't been too crazy about going to school lately. What's up? I've noticed whenever you and your brother play together lately, it turns into a fight. What's up? I've noticed bedtime's hard for us lately. What's up? I've noticed we've been struggling a lot about homework lately. What's up? See? You've got this list of unsolved problems. There was actually a reason that you would want to create that. You're plucking. You're saying what you've noticed. You are plucking an unsolved problem. You are dropping it in, and then you're saying, what's up? Now, the key to this observation is that it be neutral. Neutral is the key word. So in other words, you're not saying something along the lines of, I've noticed you're trying to ruin my life. What's up? I've noticed you don't care about your homework anymore. What's up? I've noticed you don't care if you get cavities. What's up? I've noticed you don't care if you do bad in school. What's up? I've noticed you're trying to disrupt my class. What's up? Not neutral. And what's the downside to not neutral? There's a lot of downsides to not neutral, but the biggest downside to not neutral is that it's going to shut the kid up.
So you don't want this?
Shuts the kid up. And the goal of the empathy step is to keep it
do we have any of the cookie dough at home?
You are not gathering information.
Can I make
If you're
it?
not gathering information, then you will not know what his concern or perspective is on the problem you would very much like to be solving with him.
The chips are
So it
going to take a
doesn't
while.
sit down
It's going to
behavior
be
with him.
until like a round ago. The 10 will go down. It can take that long. 4.
Empathy step.
Still need help?
This laptop is.
So we're going to practice defining the child's difficulty. And this, we won't take as long on this one. We're just going to take 5 minutes. And you may choose one of the items we practiced writing in our last breakout. You may choose one of the things you wrote on your paper that you've noticed in your classroom. You may choose some of these examples up here on the screen, but we're just going to practice slipping them into that sentence. I've noticed that. Fill in the blank. What's up? And maybe each person in your group could take turns trying one, just so we get to hear the whole thing put together. So let's say we have delivered our big line. I've noticed that. And there are lots of different possible ways that the child is going to respond. It does not always go picture perfect. In fact, it rarely does. So one possibility is that the child says nothing, just totally clams up, or says, I don't know, that's totally legit. Give plenty of answer time. So let there be some silence. It's even okay to say, take your time. This is important. I've never asked you about this before. Let's just think for a minute. If the child really can't come up with anything, you can consider making an appointment to discuss it at another time. I'm someone who needs to sit with things and kind of reflect a little bit. And this reminds me, I wanted to share with the larger group that this technique is not just for children. It comes in very handy with spouses and significant others. And And now that my husband has been watching the videos, he knows what I've been doing or trying. But anyway, time for reflection can be great. And then you come back and revisit. Another possibility is that the child is going to say, well, I don't have a problem with that, or I don't think that's a big deal. And that's a time to use reflective listening and just try and get more information, really neutral. Oh, so you don't think that's a major concern? I don't quite understand. Can you tell me more about that? Just try and get them talking. The child might say, I don't want to talk about it. And, you're not going to get very far if the child is completely shut down. So that'd be another opportunity to just make an appointment. Like, I understand. Let's try again tomorrow. The child might become really defensive and say something like, I don't have to talk to you, or something rude. And all you can do is respond with honesty. You're right. I can't make you talk. This is, I'd really love to hear what you have to say, but I can't make you talk, and let's try again another time. Now, the best possible scenario is that the child says something, anything, and that's when we start drilling. Drilling is, we were laughing about this, not a very gentle term. So Brad suggested we use inquiring, or, it could be probing, or because we don't want the child to feel like they're being grilled. Grilling involves pressure, well, why did you do that? Again, we want to stay neutral. So great questions that are examples of drilling are, how so? Or I don't quite understand yet. Or can you tell me more about that? What do you mean? Or when in doubt, and just let there be some silence and see if you can keep the child talking. As you're drilling, you keep asking yourself, do I yet understand the child's concern? And if the answer is no, you keep going. And this is a great place for the who, what, where, when, and maybe even the why at this point, if you're talking with the child, like, why do you think that's happening? But even more, a child is less likely to be able to answer why as they are who. Who are you with when that feels hard? Or what part of that is hard? Or when does that feel hard? Where are you when this happens? Just drilling to try to learn as much as you can from the child's perspective. So now we're going to hear Dr. Greene talk a little bit about that.
Now, life gets interesting the minute you say, what's up? The minute you say, what's up, you're not done with the empathy step yet. You're just getting started. Because now something's going to happen. He's either going to say something or he's not going to say something. Let's talk about him not saying something for a second. He may just sit there. That's called silence. Many adults get freaked out about silence. Many adults are so ecstatic they have now done the empathy step that silence blows them out of the water. The air just went out of their Plan B balloon, when in fact, since you never asked them about this before, the information may not exactly be on the tip of his tongue, which means you may have to be quiet. I'm working with this kindergarten kid. I actually don't know him. When I arrived to do Plan B with him, it's part of a school project that I'm working in Massachusetts, where I come in and do Plan B with a kid with his teacher so that the teacher can learn how to do Plan B. But I never met the kid, so when I come in and do this, they tell me what I'm going to be doing Plan B with him about. I was told, I'd like you to talk to him about how he has trouble keeping his hands to himself. So I said, I've heard, I couldn't say I've noticed that because I'm not his teacher. I've heard that you sometimes have trouble keeping your hands to yourself. What's up? And there we sat. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Now I'm watching carefully for the nonverbal cues. There's the nonverbal cue that says, there's the facial expression that says, I can't even remember what question you asked. It sort of looks like this. There's the nonverbal cue, I've never met you before in my life, I'm not talking to you. It looks like this. And there's the nonverbal cue, I'm thinking. That looks like this. It looked at me like he was thinking. After 30 seconds, I actually said that. I said, boy, you're really thinking, aren't you? And he went, 10 more seconds, 20 more seconds. Finally, he says, I only have trouble keeping my hands to myself when I'm with certain kids. Nice. He's talking. We're getting a little further, aren't we? What was my next question? Really? Which kids? And now I'm drilling. But before I could drill, which is what I'm about to talk about, I had to be quiet enough so the kid could talk. The other thing that people think blows Plan B out of the water is when the kid isn't silent, but instead says, I don't know. People freak over, I don't know. I don't know is honest. I'd rather actually have the kid say he doesn't know than make something up just for the sake of it. Making something up for the sake of it takes more time than I don't know. I'd rather have him say, I don't know. And all I don't know means is that we've got a little more exploring to do. Don't get freaked out over I don't know. Let's say he does say something. Your next goal is to drill, because the first thing he says is unlikely to be the total picture, which means you are now on the hook for drilling. Drilling for information. I'll give you an example of drilling, a true story. This one took place with me sitting next to a teacher for security, but her doing Plan B all on her own. She just wanted me there just in case. She's sitting with a kid. Here's how it sounded. I've noticed we haven't seen much homework coming in for you lately. What's up? It's too hard. At each point along the way, what I'd like you to ask yourself is, do I yet understand? It's too hard. Do you yet understand? No. Start drilling. It's too hard. How's it too hard? It's too much. Do you yet understand? No. Keep drilling. It's too much. What part is too much? The writing part is too much. Ah, the writing part is too much. Do you yet understand? No. What about the writing part is too much? I don't know. Well, let's think about what homework you have, and then maybe we can figure out what part of it is the writing part that's too hard and too much. What type of writing assignments do you have for homework? Let's think about that. Well, I have spelling, but all I got to do is write one word. That's not it. What else do you have? Well, in social studies, all I got to do is draw a line from one word to another. That's not it. Okay. What else do you have? Science. What about science? You're making us write entire paragraphs. Yes, I am. Is that the part that's too hard and too much? Yes. But you understand yet? Not quite, but you're getting there. You're homing in. Help me understand what it is about writing the entire paragraph for science that's so hard. You know I'm a slow writer. I start writing and I can't remember what it was that I was going to say. And then I just get all mad and I say, forget about the whole thing. Now do you understand? Good job. Well drilled. And you certainly are a whole lot further than you were when it was too hard or too much. By the way, is that a legitimate concern? Want to know what I've learned about kids, both my own two and the thousands I've worked with? Kids have legitimate concerns. Now.
So, when you've drilled down to understand the specifics, we then want to close the loop by repeating what the child said, maybe not in those exact words, but using reflective listening to make sure we understand. So it sounds like it feels too loud for you when we're all singing together. Do I have that right? Or it sounds like you don't like to read out loud in front of your classmates. Do I have that right? So whatever it is you're confirming. And of course, if the child says, no, that's not it, then you back up a step. But if you find that you really do understand, then you can move on to the second step. This is defining the adult's concern, which Ross Greene calls defining the problem step, and involves communicating your concern or perspective about the same problem. Sometimes as adults, we don't even know what our concerns are. We have lots of ideas for the solutions, but we haven't actually thought about what our concern is. Usually they fall into one of three categories: safety, learning, or how the behavior is affecting the child or others. Whatever the concern is, we slip it in now, and you can choose your phrasing. My concern is, or you can even say the thing is, and then you add your adult concern. So, for example, I've noticed it's been difficult for you to finish your work before putting it away. What's up? Child talks. You say, the thing is, if you put your work away before you finish, you may not get the practice you need to be ready for the next lesson. Or remember that problem, hey, I've noticed it's been difficult for you to wait until I'm finished with my lesson when you need help. What's up? So child talks, now it's your turn. You could say, well, my concern is I sometimes forget what I'm talking about if I'm interrupted during a lesson. And then it's harder for the other children in the lesson to learn. So you're putting your concern on the table here. This is a quick video on that topic.
Next step, you now have the kid's concern on the table. Time for your concern. That's going to be accomplished through the define the problem step, but now I wish I hadn't called it the define the problem step. I called it the define the problem step because in collaborative problem solving, a problem is defined simply by two concerns that have yet to be reconciled. The kid's and yours. Why is his concern going first? Because if your concern goes first, he thinks you're doing plan A, because that's what plan A sounds like. The goal of the define the problem step is to ensure that your concern or perspective is entered into consideration, possibly beginning with more words like the thing is, or my concern is. What's the hardest part about this ingredient? The hardest part of the empathy step, the information gathering step, is drilling. That's the hardest part of the empathy step. And going into the empathy step with an open mind, without preordained notions about what the kid's concerns are. The hardest part of the define the problem step is that adults often don't know what their concerns are. Adults often know what their solutions are. But now you know that a solution is not a concern. A concern is a concern, a solution is a solution. You're not even talking about solutions until the third ingredient of plan B. The first two ingredients of plan B are reserved exclusively for concerns. Because adults have so much trouble figuring out what their concerns are, I've actually given the matter some thought. And I basically concluded that adult concerns usually can be fit into one of three categories, if you can believe it. All the things that you're concerned about could be fit into one of three categories. Here they are: safety, learning, how the behavior is affecting one's self or others. Fit. So if you're not exactly sure what your concern is, say one of those. What would our concern be on the kid who's doing no homework? Because as we have now learned, the writing part on the science is so taking him so long and is so frustrating that he ends up doing nothing. What is our concern about that? Might sound something like this. The thing is, if you don't do any writing for your homework, this is always going to be hard for you because you're never going to get any practice. Legit. Want to know what I've learned about us adults? We have legitimate concerns too. Next step.
So our last practice of the day is we're going to just put this all together and define the adult's concern. We're going to practice this step. So we can pull one of the challenging behaviors you've already started working on and just run through it from the very beginning. Hey, I've noticed that. What's up? The thing is, or my concern is, and get it all on the table. So we're going to put it together. We only need like 3 or 4 minutes, Tamara, but we're just going to see what it feels like when we put those pieces together.
Okay.
Well, we have just a couple minutes left, and I'm not going to get through everything. So we'll just get to a good stopping point for today. But I want to close the loop kind of on the third step, which is probably, you know, the most important, and yet we haven't spent much time on yet. And we'll come back to this. But Dr. Greene calls the resolution here the invitation step, although we've renamed it brainstorming, because this is when you and the child are working on some different possible solutions that might address the concerns of both parties. So the trick is you have to be convincing that you're as interested in finding a solution that solves the child's problem as much as you are in committing to find a solution that addresses your own. But if you do that convincingly, then you just found yourself like a problem-solving partner. And that's in a really different, you know, you're in a different ball game than when you're imposing your solution or your will on a resistant child. So, I mean, it's just really easy. Let's think about how we can solve this problem together. Or I wonder if there's a way, and if you want to be really explicit, insert child's difficulty, insert adult's concern. I wonder if there's a way that you can let me know you need help, and yet I'm not interrupted during a lesson. Let's think if we can think of something that solves both of those. And you just start brainstorming. Now, it does, the solutions need to be realistic. Let's see, I'm going to skip this one. They need to be realistic and they need to be mutually satisfactory. So often a child will come up with something that's not that realistic, like, well, I'll never do that again. Or, you know, I'll always get to choose what the game is at playtime, or, and so in that point, you know, you'll kind of need to gently suggest, well, that's an idea. Do you think that would work? Let's keep thinking. The solution is never just that the child tries harder. That's not going to work. The solution also has to work for both of you. So when it doesn't work for you, you can say, well, you know, that's an idea. And I know that idea would address your concern, but I don't think it would address my concern. Let's see if we can come up with something that works for both of us. And you keep going. And then if the child, or if you together come up with an idea that works for both of you, you'll agree to try that for a while. Now, you're always going to come back to this, revisit it at a later time, and check in and see how it's working. If you can't get to some kind of agreement, it's okay. You've done an amazing amount of modeling already, just about self-awareness, name it to tame it, you know, from our other training. You are modeling problem solving, brainstorming, collaboration, cooperation. So, you know, if you don't work a miracle in that first session, it's okay. Or if you all pick something and it does not work, that's okay too, because you're going to revisit it and keep working on it. And those are amazing things for the child to learn how to do. So that's something we have to keep in mind, is just doing this process with the child is teaching them so much and so many adaptive skills. It's not even about the little specific thing necessarily. Like, we're growing those muscles for them. And the child's going to be way more invested in the solution if he or she helped come up with the strategy. I'm going to skip this video, and we're going to come back to common mistakes another time. So we're going to have one final sort of revisit at the end of the school year, where we're going to kind of we'll dig a little deeper into this last step, the brainstorming step, maybe share some of our experiences experimenting with this. And at that point, I can show you this video since we're out of time today. There's a nice simulation of what this looks like all together. It's a little cheesy and it's in a public school setting, but they have a teacher and a student sitting together and you get to see a demo conversation, and that's really, really useful. So we'll do that next time. Our homework assignment for May, or whenever it is that we're meeting again to close this discussion, is to start practicing Plan B with a couple of students over the next couple of months. And if all you get to is defining the child's difficulty, or practicing the empathy step, that's really okay, because that takes a while to get used to. If you don't even get into the brainstorming part, no worries. Like, we just are going to practice I've noticed that, what's up, and listening. It could be useful for practice. You could work through this with your classroom team at one of your weekly meetings, where you pick a child or a challenge and think about how to phrase it, or even during a level meeting. You can also try it at home with your own children if you have children. It's just important to practice, however you want to practice. And then the next time we get together, let's plan to share what was easy, what was hard, some tricks we've learned along the way. I'd love examples of solutions that you and the child came up with, and then what happened when you tried them. And in the meantime, though, I'm going to ask you all to be each other's coaches. So if we're practicing, not to be afraid to just say to a colleague, like, oh wait, I just heard an adult theory in there, like let's try to figure out how to say that, or let's all help each other, because it doesn't always come naturally. But in the meantime, I'm going to send an email after this with tons of resources, and the first is the Lives in the Balance website, which has all these tools, all these videos, and a lot more. I'm also going to pick out my favorites. There's like a Plan B cheat sheet. You can put it on your fridge or your classroom walls so that you can remember the steps, the ALSUP, and a how-to ALSUP guide, the plan, all those pieces. And I'm going to put those in the general drive. And someone also asked me if this PowerPoint could be in the general drive. So I'll throw that in there too. It's going to be in a folder under student support called CPS Ross Greene resources. And then if you really want to go deeper, I highly recommend one of these two books. The Explosive Child was written for parents, although it's all applicable. I mean, the examples are going to be more parenting examples, but the technique's exactly the same. And it's just how you use this with your child. Lost and Found is something he wrote specifically for educators. And he calls it Helping Behaviorally Challenging Students, and while you're at it, all the others. To Sonia's point, like, this doesn't have to be just for that extremely challenging child. It's just a great technique to get to use in the classroom. So questions or parting thoughts before we close today?
Margaret, it's Shelley.
Hi, Shelley.
I wanted to say, firstly, thank you. That was really good.
Thank you.
And I really, for me personally, when we were watching one of the videos of Ross Greene, I was kind of brainstorming one of my children and thinking, I know they're going to say, I don't know. And I was already thinking, what do I do when they say, I don't know at me? So I really liked when he actually used that example, because that was exactly what I was doing my own thing in my head when they just go, I don't know, to me, what do I say next? Because I felt like that was a shutdown, but so it was really good for me to hear that isn't kind of them shutting down. You just have to keep going. So that for me,
Right, we are all,
it's really useful with elementary age children who tend to say, I don't know quite a lot.
I think if they see we're not scared by that hasn't totally thrown us.
Yeah, because it was throwing me.
We'll get a little farther. And we have to keep in mind, they need to practice this too. So, you know, my daughter stunk at this in the beginning. You know, she would either couldn't think of anything, would come up with ridiculous solutions, all her own, you know, selfish solution, you know, just, we have had to keep practicing and practicing and practice, and she's 6, so it's still hard. But what I've noticed is that she started saying, I'm a problem solver, you know, and she just kind of like has this mindset, like, we're going to figure it out kind of thing. Now, not when she's flipping out, but in the calm moments, you know, it's slowly coming. So I can attest to, you know, how powerful this tool can be, but it does take practice.
Thank you.
Margaret, I have to tell you, I've used this with my own children, and I've been told that I ask too many questions. Oh gosh.
Teenagers.
Yes. Yes, I do have a 15 and a 12-year-old, so. So it's like, yeah, because I love you. I do. But yeah, but it helps beautifully in the classroom.
Yeah.
I mean, I know one day it'll help with my children too. It's just that, you know, they just argue a lot, teenagers.
Yeah, especially with moms and dads. So it's such a gift, like if someone in the school setting takes this on with the child, right? Because we already have these magical powers of just, you know, not having to wear all those different hats, and they respond differently to us. So
yes,
we can help parents so much by
absolutely
doing this.
Yep. Thank you.
I don't want to cut anybody else off, but Margaret and I are talking about scheduling a Ross Greene for parents. So if you particularly have children who have are challenging their parents, and I think it's good for everybody. I went home immediately after Margaret and I reviewed this and changed my approach on something with one of my children. So everybody needs this information. And so we'll be offering it to parents. We will do a follow-up, like Margaret said, in May. So we can solidify this for ourselves as a community, because this is really going to be foundational for how we navigate children who are having difficulties.